in the chat room so I can see what's going on while we do this thing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can see it. Alrighty. Well, after a bunch of weird stuff happening, hi everybody. Welcome to Subscriber Appreciation Day for June of 2017. And it's a crazy one. This is like in the middle of a bunch of really insane things that happening in my life. And that's why this is not a typical night. But it's going to be an exciting time. Next week is going to be the Holy VidCon, first one I've ever gone to. And I have a guest, a longtime viewer of the show, another history YouTuber, and that is Mr. Beats, who has the Mr. Beats, it's like Mr. Beats Social Science channel or something like that.
Yeah, I just call him Mr. Beat now. Yeah.
Ah, changed it. So this Mr. Beats is, or Mr. Beat is also a history YouTuber, but also does a lot of musical numbers, I guess is the term.
Yeah.
The first time I saw your channel was, I think it was my friend Will, who showed me a video that was a cover of a song by kind of our local legend Drake, where you used Hotline Bling to describe the conditions that started the Second World War.
Yep. That was a fun one. I put on I dressed up like Hitler. I put on a little Hitler mustache with tape, and maybe that was to bad taste, but it was fun. It's I do a few parody songs, but I also do originals. So I have songs about all the presidents. That's what kind of started the whole thing. I expanded it from there. So yeah.
And you've done all 45?
I have not done President Trump. I wait until the term is over, so that's why I didn't release the Obama song until the end of January, right after his term ended. I was like, okay, let's do this. I recorded it and released it. So
nice.
A lot could happen with the Trump administration between now and 6 months in the future when he's impeached. So.
Oh my. Yeah. Did you do anything special for? I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. The guy who was president for 2 non-consecutive terms.
Grover Cleveland.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah.
No, I just did one song for him. He is one of my favorite presidents, though, and so I did spend a lot of time on that one. I always spent more time on the presidents that I respected more than the ones I didn't. So, sorry, Franklin Pierce. I'm sorry.
Or I gotta imagine that it would be hard to do one for. Oh God, man, sorry. I was in a basement. And I just woke up. The Indiana president, the one who died 30 days in the office, because he did a big long speech during his.
That was a short song, William Henry Harrison. Yeah, that was. I think that clocked in at just over 2 minutes. But I put a lot of effort in that one too. I mean, who knows? He could have been great.
And then his son was also president, if I recall too.
And Benjamin Harrison.
Grandson, sorry. Yeah.
I was not a fan of Benjamin Harrison. He was actually the president right after Grover Cleveland, between the Grover Cleveland terms. And hey, for those of you who don't know, Tristan's Canadian, so if you it's impressive that you know any of these presidents. Really, I know very little about Canadian leaders. So I'm impressed. I need to learn more about Canadian history. I really do.
I guess I'm a U.S. historian though, so I should be on top of this. It's just that my comprehensive exam field started in 1877, so I am a little rusty on the. I mean, Grover Cleveland is a Gilded Age president, but the kind of.
That explains all your American history videos, because I was always wondering about that. You do a great job with them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did a master's in American Studies, and then I have U.S. history doing after that.
All right.
But yeah, not knowing much about our prime ministers, like the one that our first prime minister who drunkenly passed out during a parliament meeting. He was like known as like a rampaging alcoholic who was also prime minister.
That about sums up a lot of politicians historically. I mean, they're all drunk when they got together and at the Constitutional Convention. Like that's what got them through.
Well, it sounds like, because if I recall correctly, this is like a thing that happens in America or like in North American culture in general, is that like we used to drink like a lot, and then we had our time where like we went through Prohibition, and then after Prohibition we came back, but never quite as much. And so like casual drinking just never had the renaissance that it had like beforehand.
Yeah, I actually have a video about Prohibition, and if you look historically, you know, it was always like the wealthy had more access to the alcohol, but than you were drinking, like, and just the fact that it was, I mean, there's a lot of kind of misconceptions around it, and I don't want to exaggerate too much, but in general, yeah, the average American did drink a lot more, say, in 1817 as opposed to 2017. So, and you know, you could say that about other drugs too. I mean, look at, it really became a problem in the later 1800s when, with the rise of industrialization, is when more and more people became a little bit, I think, disillusioned with the world, and they kind of turned to, kind of like today, like everybody's on drugs. I mean, like today, like I would argue that instead of it being alcohol, it's prescription drugs. Like everybody's got something that's kind of keeping things stable for them or trying to.
The amount of things that you can do to compare our age now to the Gilded Age are numerous and worth a long, deep conversation. But just to get started, we are still pretty early on here. Introduce yourself to the channel and the viewers. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I better do that. Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Matt Beat, known as Mr. Beat on YouTube and all that, and I'm a teacher. I teach history to high schoolers, mostly 11th grade, and mostly American history. I also teach economics, and I've taught various things in the past. I think it's going to be my 8th year next year. I always lose track, but yeah, it's a third career for me. My first career was in journalism, and so I kind of combined my journalism background with my teaching. I posted my first history video back in technically it was 2009. I was student teaching, and I just made a video kind of as a fun escape from the content for a little bit. But then over the years, I found that these silly videos I was making, people other than my own students were watching them. So I was like, okay, I'll start making. It's evolved over I really only started taking my history YouTube channel seriously probably about 2 or 3 years ago. Is when I really like, okay, I'm going to try to make something of this. But yeah, I show my own videos to my own students. They get ridiculously sick of them. I'm not very cool, I don't think, to them, but apparently other people like them. So.
That's I guess that's the first question I got to say is, how is the challenge of teaching history to the 15 to 17-year-old crowd?
I love it. I mean, I'm a little crazy. I used to teach 7th grade American history and geography, and that was, I would say, a little bit more challenging, although that's also a really fun age. But yeah, I mean, obviously high schoolers are a little jaded and they're like, what are we doing here? And I was the same way. I mean, I became a teacher partially because I was I reflected back on teachers that I had in high school and middle school, especially history teachers, and most of them were not that good. Most of them were there to coach. They weren't there to teach. the one or two that I had that were really good, I remember I'm like, wow, like they try to make it engaging and fun and just, I mean, honestly, I didn't fall in love with history because of them. I fell in love with history, and this is only partially a joke, because of Forrest Gump.
Oh my, okay.
When I was a kid, I watched Forrest Gump, and believe it or not, like that's what kind of got me into history. I'm like, wait, you telling me, Dad, you saying this really happened? This stuff really, I mean, obviously there was inaccuracies, but I mean, but yeah, like teaching high school it's certainly, people think I'm crazy. I love it. It's in a small town. It's just outside of Kansas City. And so we have a good mix of, in terms of background of the students, but it's still generally one demographic. And so, but I live in Lawrence, which is about 30 miles west of Kansas City. And so like, it's a little bit more diverse there as far as opinions, at least, but I do have to be careful with what I post on social media or what videos I make. Like I just made a video about Obergefell v. Hodges, which is the same-sex marriage Supreme Court case. And I was just given the facts, but still I'm thinking like, what about the parents that probably are still against that decision strongly and they're seeing me make it? I mean, you got to be careful when you're a teacher, and especially since they're a captive audience. I mean, that's why it's sometimes okay that my students don't think I'm very cool.
Oh man, I can imagine living in that box, and I would itch because I'm not that good at keeping my cards close to the chest. So, oh man.
Yeah, especially why I made a video about the election of 2016, like in January, like right after the inauguration of President Trump, and it was really hard to be objective, obviously, but a lot of people say that I did a good job of doing that. However, there was a lot of Trump supporters that were angry. There was a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters that were angry. I mean, to me, that's actually more vindication that I did do a good job of trying. But it's hard when you're doing recent events, and you've done recent events. I know, like you even did. I mean, you sometimes tackle like one of my favorite videos of yours is the 9/11 conspiracy video, like. And that's something, you think about it, it's like not that long ago, you know, and there's still new interpretations, there's still new evidence that could arise. I mean, that's why they always say to wait like a generation before you really start digging in deep to history. I don't know if they say that. That's what I say. I mean, but I still sometimes tackle recent events.
Yeah, that video is interesting because it's a stab anyway at my dissertation topic, which has to do with 9/11 and memory, like how people, like how I'm trying to interrogate how memory and history are related and how something becomes a historical event over periods of time. And 9/11 is a really good example on how to do that. But whenever I think I even said this in the video, when I mention the kind of work that I do, I have been asked about the conspiracy theory. It comes up in virtually every conversation I have. And so I just thought I just have learned a lot of the arguments and a lot of the stuff. And so that's where that came from.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think most conspiracy theories come from, I mean, there's various reasons, but I think a big reason why people come up with these theories is because there's unanswered questions or answers that are not, that they don't sit right with people. They don't like the answers that are given by whatever official investigation is. Like obviously the Warren Commission with the JFK assassination. That's another great example of, in my opinion, the investigation was sloppy. It was basically like, your average historian probably would have done a much better job. And because of the sloppy investigation, that leaves all these questions open. Like, you know, like, well, how do we, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, and that's why even when I teach something like that, I'm just like, hey guys, there's other opinions out there about this. And it's not like the book is completely shut, but we do know there's a lot of truth here. And you can't dismiss everything.
Yeah, I think
So,
I think when it comes to that, the United States, especially like the United States security apparatus, really likes to keep specifically things secret when it involves either major screw ups or holes in their security or something. And that's what I imagine why the
mm,
Warren Commission is so like locked down on the things about like because when they basically when JFK got shot, it was like a huge hole in their security, and they obviously don't want another assassination, so they weren't going to show exactly how Lee Harvey Oswald like got around everything. And I also know that 9/11 was also
yeah,
like a really big hole and everything like that. And the thing is that if you keep things opaque and you don't have that kind of transparency, people are going to start filling in the holes. I think
yep.
that's also the story probably behind the Roswell thing, if you think about it.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
Because obviously they weren't going to say what it actually was because it was the stealth bomber, I think, that they were working on at that time. And
Right.
they can't say no. It wasn't a UFO. It was a airplane that is undetectable by radar, so that we can drop bombs on the Soviet. No, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. But
So,
go ahead. I
oh, go ahead.
was going to say, yeah, VidCon, like next, this is your first VidCon, right?
Yes, yes, it is. I've never been a YouTuber of enough notoriety to consider going and make actual like contacts and stuff until this one that's coming up next week.
Yeah, it's going to be my first too. I would not say I have notoriety, but I was, but yeah, like I always found excuses like of not to go, and yeah, why not? I mean, that there's the fact that there's going to be so many, YouTube educators there in one spot. That fact alone, I think, is really important because there's a lot of us that collaborate. We don't meet in person. Like I met maybe a couple other YouTube educators, history educators in person over the years, like Tom Ritchie. I met him once, and there's this guy named Robert Marshall who I did a podcast with, Reading Through History. It's a great channel. Check it out. But other than that, like it's like just like we're doing now. Like I mean, we're so far away; it's not practical for us to meet in person. So meeting in person and just kind of bouncing ideas off each other and looking to help each other, I think that's going to be. I mean, that's the main reason why I'm going. I mean, just to, go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's going to be really exciting to just be in a room with a bunch of people who do the exact same thing that you do, and as people who spend a lot of time doing something that everyone else thinks is either peculiar or crazy, it'll be good to be amongst your own kind for a bit.
Definitely. When I try to describe to people, a lot of people, about what I do on the side, I call this my side job now, just because if I do that, it makes it more legitimate because I do spend a lot of hours making these videos, and this is the first year I really decided I'm just going to treat this like a job. And sure, I don't make much money off these things yet, but maybe I will in the future. So if I treat it like a job, and I just, because people always ask, well, what do you do in the summer? And I always want to say, oh no, I just sleep the whole summer. What the heck do you think? And most teachers I know have summer jobs, and I have in the past too. But this summer, I'm just like, I just finished grad school, and I'm like, this is the time to just hunker down and be more committed to it, because that's really what it. I notice YouTube educators, their primary job is teaching, or just like in your case, you're working on your PhD, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like that, this is always something on the side. Sometimes you get more into it, sometimes not, and it's kind of a tragedy because I mean, if we all dedicated like much more energy into it, I think it would be beneficial to everyone. I mean, because there's a lot of great channels out there.
Oh yeah, I think there's people who are doing it the full time, and there's a pathway to get there though, and it's long and arduous, and there's no rule book or one way to do it, and so it feels like you're very much lost in the woods. It's another reason why VidCon feels so essential, and it's going to be so fun, is that most people are on a similar type of trajectory, and we can all help each other out with advice and with contacts, and who knows what comes out of it. I have a giant pile of business cards and some books on whatever networking is that I'm going to have to go through in the airplane and see what happens.
Yeah, here's my business cards right here. Let's see here. Oh, no, these are my stickers. I got stickers. Yeah. I'm going all out, too. I mean, and if you want to join me, I don't know if it's appropriate to say this live on the air, but the heck with it. I'm sure your subscribers don't mind. But, like, I'm going to be out in front of VidCon on the day of registration, and I'm going to do, like, what Jay Leno used to do. It was a segment called Jaywalking, where he just asked people random history questions to see if they get it right. I think that would be kind of a fun little Derek from Veritasium, he used to do that in his early videos with science, though. He would just go on the street and ask people, oh, do you know about this? And most people would actually kind of look like idiots, but that's okay. It's fun.
That could be really fun. I think from registration until, like, I think there's like an education thing in the evening. I think between those hours, nothing is claimed yet. So that could be a fun thing
on doing it. Yeah. So we're going to meet that night. I'm excited to meet you in person. It'd be great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's going to be, I hope it's going to be really fun. I love that convention center, and I know that area a little bit. So it's going to be really enjoyable. And California is basically like this wonderful tropical paradise that for some reason has 49 other states attached to it. I don't understand.
I definitely understand why people want to live there. It makes a lot of sense to me. Like, if you had New York and LA to choose from, why would you choose New York? I just don't understand that, because the cost of living is even still a little cheaper in LA. And that's what blows my mind. But
you just got to have a car.
The public transportation component is a little worse in LA, but they're working on it. Elon Musk is working on it, man. Elon Musk has a plan.
Yeah, he's turning the underground into Swiss cheese, and
it's that simple.
Mm-hmm. So, what are you? All right, so we're doing VidCon. It's coming up. What kind of stuff do you have planned for that week?
I just want to learn as much as possible and network as much as possible. I find, well, I guess I might as well bring this up because I did mention it to you on Twitter, but I did have a viral video for the first time this past week, and it only took, what, 6-7 years. So, but that was on Facebook, which was it's an interesting platform, because if it was on YouTube, I would have been much more excited. But on Facebook, they count the views differently, and it's not monetized, and so there's no ad revenue there. It's a lot of good exposure, and I mean, it was pretty cool. Like, it was something that I knew could potentially go viral, and I actually have done a lot of research onto why videos go viral. Our type of content, educational content, is usually not the type that goes viral, though. And so I've just kind of accepted that over the years. Like, that's okay. We have generally evergreen videos that will be around. They'll consistently get views, hopefully long term. It's not something a lot of us experience, and I don't know, like, I guess that's, in some ways, though, some channels, they rely on that first viral video just to kind of get that initial momentum. I don't see that much momentum coming from this, but it's a video, in case you are wondering, about why Kansas City, Missouri is in Missouri, like, because it's called Kansas City. And it's actually the Kansas City that people think of as it's in Missouri, which doesn't make sense. But in the video, I basically explain how Kansas City, Missouri came before Kansas even existed. And then there was Kansas City, Kansas that came later. And it confuses people that even live in Kansas City. They're like, I don't understand this. But so I understand, because of that, a lot of people that lived in Kansas City shared the video, especially with their friends from out of town. So. But yeah, so
It might surprise you to know I've actually been to Kansas City before once.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Where'd you go?
No, I didn't do too many touristy things. What happened is that my wife's friend, who did her PhD here, was from Kansas City, and then when she finished, she moved down there and had babies, and we went to go see the babies, and so we spent the week with newborns because it was like she had identical twins, and her husband was in the military, so he was away for a bit, and so it was mostly a baby thing. But I do remember the interesting story about that place, about how there is a Kansas City, Kansas, and it is right beside Kansas City, Missouri. There's like the border, and that these two often snipe at each other for businesses and for like money and traffic and stuff, and they're always like trying to snipe businesses from the other side to come to their city, and it's like it's actually like gotten so cutthroat and competitive that they've had to like put down some ground rules about it.
Oh yeah, they call it the border war. I mean, I actually filmed the video partially at the on State Line Road, which runs right through the middle of the metro, and it on one side of Missouri, and there's all these different laws. Like one example is if you drive a motorcycle in Kansas, there's no law that says you have to wear a helmet. In Missouri, you have to wear a helmet, and so you literally see, like, as soon as they cross the street, taking the helmet off once they get into Missouri.
Oh,
which
God.
is, I mean, that's just one example. Like, I mean, so it's interesting, but overall, like it's another kind of example of how borders can easily become meaningless. Like, despite the economic incentives that you mentioned, or I think you were implying there, like I think eventually someday borders will become more of an archaic thing. I think as the world becomes, what's his name, Thomas Friedman, as he put it, like, because we're all more interconnected because of globalization, I think that borders are becoming more and more of a thing. That, like, why do we have these? Like, isn't this making our life more difficult? Before you get all the comments, like, yeah, I understand there's legitimate reasons for borders, especially with certain threats, but we're not ready for it yet. But I'm saying way down the line, I think that's going to be the case. Sorry.
Yeah, I actually think that there's a book that I read about a year ago that was trying to show how the world, if you look at it from a different angle, could be reorganized around essentially like these blobs of metropolitan areas, and that this is a more intelligent way to organize societies than like the kind of arbitrary borders that we've drawn up now. And so what he found is that like 99% of the population live in like a handful of these sort of city clusters. And I think I live in the one that would be considered like the Chicago, New York, Boston, Washington, Toronto, Detroit blob. And like that would be
that's big. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's just like there's like a lot of the human race lives in like these areas around these major cities with a lot of nothing in between.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be. They say actually it's more. I keep saying they say, but I read an article that said it makes much more sense for society to be designed that way. What do they call it? Whatever the term is that you're kind of it's not just a metro area. We're talking multiple metro areas that are relatively close to each other. Whereas if you have a small town and all these other small towns that are spread out, you're making things more expensive and inconvenient, and like kind of weird to think about, because when I think of like New York City, I don't think of people walking down the street like, yeah, all right, traffic and people everywhere and stress. But I mean, who knows? Maybe there's something to that.
Oh yeah, just to like answer, Omar asked what the book's name was. The book I'm talking about is called Connectography, and Connectography: Mapping the Future of Global Civilization by Parag Khanna. And if you want a TLDR version of it, I think he did a TED Talk on the same topic.
Cool.
So, how about another question that comes up, because like you're an American history teacher, and you're also teaching. What do you guys call it? Junior year, right? Is that what that term's called?
Mostly, yes.
So that means that you probably have to teach a lot with the SATs in mind.
Well, they don't. At my school, they generally don't take the SAT. They take the ACT, which is similar. But yeah, it's you know, there's not as much overlap as you would think, and I'm a really big critic of standardized tests. I'm not a very big names and dates type of teacher. I'm a big idea type of teacher. Like, I want you to get these big ideas that it also helps make the curriculum more relevant. And so, yeah, there are, I mean, that's something actually I'll be honest with you, I don't really worry about it too much. But
Okay.
I probably, I mean, other schools I've taught in the past, there was more pressure, but that's just because that was the culture. Like, yeah.
Yeah, because I know I've heard like horror stories about like how like teacher pay and like stuff like that is all tied to like how well students do, and like there's like this really like harsh test-based feedback system that I don't understand at all, but it sounded really like it would be a recipe for nervousness.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't have to worry about that. And in fact, I think that's very rare. I have never known anywhere, at least around Kansas, where that's the case. I have heard of other places, but yeah, that's just I mean, there are so many things that are out of your control. As a teacher, I mean, I'm a parent and a teacher. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I know that they are. I can already tell you how they're going to do in school. I can already tell you. My older one's going to get straight A's. My younger one's not. And I don't care if she sees this someday. It doesn't mean she's worse or anything. It just means I can tell that she's already not going to be as academically inclined. There are certain and also parenting. Like, the first 3 years of this is so important in terms of how the parents interact with the kid. Like, do they read to the kid regularly? Do they give them lots of positive attention, not negative attention, positive attention? So many factors. Those first 3 years of 16-year-old, that's out of my control. Like, I can be as best facilitator as I can. I can try to maybe help them find passions that they didn't realize yet. Those that are hard to motivate, just to do just enough so that they can graduate or pass my class. But I am limited, and I say that not because I'm like, it's not my responsibility. I just say that as it's just, that's a realistic outlook here. I mean, there's students, you have to be at least somewhat realistic. Okay. My wife's watching. She says I know Regan's gonna do well in school. Okay. I got in trouble.
Oh no.
And she says that she's sick of seeing my face on screen. You keep showing my face and not your beautiful face. It's only my face.
It should be based on like it should be. Is it? Oh, I think this is supposed to be automatic somehow.
Yeah, I don't. It usually is.
Oh no! Did I like? All right, I think I fixed it. All right.
Okay.
I am sorry. I am sorry for the lack of my face.
We need your face.
So I just got a question asking if I'd be willing to produce a video on the Irish potato famine. I mean, that'd be fun. I I feel like I would take a very different angle on it than many people, but I'd be curious. What would you do a video on the Irish potato famine? What would your thoughts on that one be?
I mean, I'm not going to claim dibs on it. I know there's a, but I think it'd be really interesting. I mean, I have a list of about 50 videos I want to do, so I have to. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I actually I'll give a little bit about what if I did make one of these videos. Unfortunately, like every video I do is a month's investment of work. So I will say that when it comes to Irish potato famine, the coolest thing I think about that is the whole discussion about the Malthusian trap. And so what the Malthusian trap was this concept that that there's like this high point of our ability to feed people, and that if we hit that limit, we're not going to stop reproducing, and then we'll pass it, and then they'll end up with this huge instability and economic collapse. Now, what happened with Ireland is that the potato is not a native species. The potato is originally from like the Andes Mountains in South America, and so it's one of those imports because of the Columbian Exchange. And the potato is very, very special because it is a vegetable that can grow in very harsh climates as far as plants go. It is very rich in pretty much all the vitamins and minerals you could want, and it is very calorie dense to the point where it is basically one of the few foods out there that you could live almost entirely off of for your entire sustenance. And a lot of people in Ireland did do that. There's like these insane numbers I hear about Irish people eating like 10 kilograms of potatoes a day. And they would eat nothing else. But what happened was when the potato came over to Ireland, the Irish started reproducing out of control because basically the potato opened up so many more usable calories per acre of farmland that the Irish were having like, this really great caloric abundance. And what do you do when you have lots of resources? You have more children. But then because it's so useful, it became the only thing that a lot of them grew. And when you started getting this fungus that started killing the potato, the blight, it led to a very huge population crash, and one that I think this is what Warbot wants me to get at, is that for a lot of people, it's responsible for the huge Irish diaspora and also for a giant collapse in the Irish population, to the point where I'm actually not sure if their population has ever reached the levels of the pre-famine days. And also, people don't acknowledge how much the English basically conspired to make it much, much worse than it should have been. That's all I remember.
Yeah,
I don't know how to. I have another question here that's about the free territory of the Ukraine, and I have to say to that one that I have no comment on that one because that is a topic of a video that is currently in production.
Oh.
I remember that. Yeah, for the 20,000 subscriber, I had people vote on what videos they wanted, and the free territory of the Ukraine, the Nestor Makhno Black Ukrainian Army topic came in #1 by a huge margin. So that's what I'm working on. Whenever I can get it out.
Wow. I get a lot of requests for the same things over and over. It sounds like your subscribers suggesting interesting topics.
Yeah, I think you almost like you sow the seeds of the people you end up getting interested in stuff. And when I made that video about anarchists in Spain, lots of requests afterwards for something like the Black Ukrainian Army.
Mm-hmm. Channel, I can't get out of that songs that I made first. Every presidential election in American history, which wrapped up And now people are like, well, shoot, what else are we going to do now? You're going to be out of a job. And so I did Supreme Court briefs, which is looking at different Supreme Court cases. But I'm still kind of pulled into American history, and I want to branch out a little bit. I did that with a Cold War ended video, which I know you did something similar to that, like on the end of the Cold War. You did the moon landings, like. I always get requests for like, hey, could you do something about this president or this election? And I'm trying to get away from that a little bit, and probably lost a few subscribers because of that, honestly.
Yeah, that's one of the things about YouTube that I found very peculiar is that if you some people subscribe, like when you get into like thousands of subscribers, you start to notice that like people subscribe for very specific purposes, and if you make something that is a little outside of that, you will lose a few. And I remember it because when I released the Raelian video, that was a little weird and off-brand, and it was a kind of loss of a day when it came to subscribers because of that, and I thought that was a little interesting.
Mm-hmm. A lot of great ideas. The Spanish flu, Black Plague, yeah.
Plagues and diseases are good. There's a lot of really good U.S. topics that also I feel would do lovely with a little bit of attention to them, like the filibusters, not like the not reading the dictionary people, but like the American explorers who would like go to places like Nicaragua and try to like set up new territories, or like the story of Hawaii and how Hawaii joined the United States is kind of cool. Actually, there's probably a series out of like just talking about the story about how all of the different videos or how all the different states got involved with the past, or got involved with the country, or got into the union or something like that. If you want to like, if you really like those like, you know, series that have a lot of search potential.
Yeah, I actually, when I teach about Hawaii, I kind of bring up a lot of the details that probably other teachers don't. I mean, it's like, yeah, like I never was taught that. Like and I understand why. Like essentially it was government and corporations working together to a sovereign nation. Mm-hmm. So
I also oh man, sorry, I continue your thought.
That kind of leads to a question I was wanting to ask you is, how much emphasis do you think there should be in terms of remembering the negative and remembering the positive about history? Because I've had discussions with other this, like, in my opinion, I think that it's learning about what we did wrong, and because a lot of times we like to forget what we did wrong. It kind of does get, because when we're reminded of it, it depresses us. Like, oh yeah, that. Well, let's just forget that we ever did those horrible things. Like, and then, so what are your opinions on that?
Well, I think that there's a couple things that I imagine that you as a history teacher can have a lot of empathy with, and that is, very often historians are grinding up against a very a history that has been written for a very different purpose than, you know, academic education, and that is like the history as nation building process. Mm-hmm. And so very often I imagine that many historians would like to just say everything that's happening at any given time, but usually you feel like you have this obligation to point out the atrocities that never got mentioned, because, you know, everyone knows all the positive stuff, it seems, and no one remembers the atrocities. The only time that I can only think of like one example off the top of my head of a time where there's like a really positive, awesome thing that America did, or country has done, that people have forgotten about, and so I feel like it's worth drawing attention to.
Yeah, and I know that it's tough because, like, I never forget when I was student teaching. It's funny that I brought up student teaching again, because that was every teacher will say the same thing. When they start out teaching, it's always just a wreck when you're student teaching. But anyway, there was a substitute teacher that day. The corresponding teacher that I was working with was gone, and I was teaching about the Trail of Tears, and this was to 8th graders. And like, I tried to be as objective as possible, just give them some facts, and then they explored a little bit on their own. And the substitute teacher came up to me afterwards, and he just said, I just wish, that teachers wouldn't spend so much time looking at, the dark and depressing things that we did as a country. And I kind of I didn't know how to respond to him. I'm just like, do you realize that most of what we do is the opposite? We glorify a lot of the past. Like, even think about how war is interpreted today. Like, war is always glorified. Even today, I mean, not until I would say Vietnam, at least in the United States. I can't speak for the world, but I mean, World War I, also like 1920s, the Lost Generation writers and all that. But it wasn't until the 20th century when finally people were, we should really rethink war,
Yeah.
And it's to this day. I mean, we like to say that, oh no, we need to avoid going to war, and but the thing is, I think we say that, but at the same time, like, we're still for, like, all right, yeah, the president bombed the crap out of ISIS, yeah, that was showing. Like, there's that disconnect there. Like, it's not still treated as a last resort, and I think it's always easy to glorify your side because you're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Clearly, there's never that moral goody there.
And so if there's one thing about being a historian, and the important job of being a historian, is that you end up having to be the damp rag who comes in and goes, well, actually, a lot. But I've just been looking through. We have like a good backlog of questions that people have been throwing at us. So, all right, let's take a look. I wanted to. Someone asked just offhand, can you tell us something about the history of Bulgaria? And I will say, not particularly. I had a Bulgarian teacher when I was in in community college, but all I can remember exactly is that it is, to this day, a majority Muslim country, and that for a long time it was part of the Ottoman Empire until it all of a sudden wasn't. That's the big stuff on top of my head that I can think of.
They have good wine.
Oh man, yeah. The Balkans are a hard region to write well about because they don't have a lot of really good history books written about the Balkans in English, and so unless I plan on learning one of the 7 or 8 or 9 languages spoken in the Balkans, it's really hard to do something good about it. But it's a really cool region, and for the longest time, especially when we're having this long, drawn-out discussion about the Christian world and the Islamic world meeting each other. Well, the Balkans is where that happened in the most visceral and intense way possible for centuries, and so it'd be really interesting to see what kind of really cool cultures and cooperation and things happen when you live in a region where Catholicism, Orthodox Christianity, and Islam kind of work so close to each other. It's kind of like when you think about Spain, and when you hear about how there's always really cool things going on between Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Spain.
I mean, that term balkanization, I think, says so much about why it often gets neglected in history books, is because historians are just like, okay, how do we tackle this one? We've got so many different groups. We got so many different nations, and who do we focus on more? Who do we it's it's hard. It's easier for a historian just to look at the British Empire and say, okay, here's a history of the British Empire or this aspect of it. I guess it's easier to study. All right, right? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I actually I think we really underestimate how much the histories of certain regions are hard to do unless you know the language of the region, because unless there's enough of a commercial incentive to translate books written by academics in that area, it's actually really hard to get. And so, like, there's not a ton of great books on, like, say, Serbian history in English. There's a few, I imagine, if I looked into it, but like the real depth and the really cool stories that come out of just Serbia as an example would be in Serbian or in other kind of, maybe like in like Russian or something, depending upon the language group. But yeah, language is a huge barrier, and that's why you're supposed to, anyway, for your PhD, have at least a second language to move forward.
Yeah, it probably helps if that language is Latin too, right? Or,
depends on what you're doing.
Maybe Greek, or I don't know. Yeah, that's that's a big challenge. I mean, not speaking the same language, and so many things are lost in translation. Yeah, you just kind of take that for granted. I mean, I think the problem too is that when like, United States, American, the average American doesn't know a second language, like, unless they're an immigrant. So that you look at other countries, especially in Europe. I mean, it's like, especially Scandinavia, like, where it's like, it's mandatory that everyone knows the second language. How do you feel about that? Do you think that, that should be enforced around the world like that? Would that be better for everyone?
I still think that learning languages, second languages and third languages especially, are really good, even if you don't even if it has nothing to do with opening yourself up culturally or whatever. Just the idea of learning multiple languages helps you deconstruct how languages work and kind of get a general understanding of communication in ways that, if you don't know other languages, you won't get as much. And but also it does show that there's a lot of evidence to show that the way that your language is constructed kind of shapes how you think, and having those kind of different grammar styles and words and things like that can help you out. This is why we all get really excited when we have new words like you remember, like, probably about 15 years ago when everyone discovered what the word Schadenfreude was, and everyone started making a big deal about it because it was like a thing that we knew, we felt, but we couldn't put a word onto it, and then all of a sudden everyone was talking about it.
I have no idea what you're talking about. No, that sounds great though.
Oh, you haven't heard about Schadenfreude?
No.
It's just a German word that doesn't have a direct translation in English, and it's the taking pleasure at other people's misfortune.
Oh.
But I'm like probably about 10 years ago, so that started entering the English lexicon a little bit, and I said it's a word that didn't exist in English, and so it's kind of useful. But also, like, especially in the United States is a very bilingual country where the learning of a second language has become very politicized. Like, I don't imagine, or I can't imagine how difficult it would be for, say, living in the Southwest without knowing Spanish would be. But, like, there's such a huge Hispanic component to the American population that the idea of, like, Spanish not being an official language and, like, being part of the thing, like, since, like, Guadalupe Hidalgo would not be a thing.
That just kind of shows you American dominance over the years, that even to this day, there's a pretty large segment of the population in the American Southwest that absolutely refuses to speak Spanish, and they will never speak Spanish. And it is interesting.
Yeah, Will's in the chat, and he gave an example of another thing where the Germans took an English word, and that was Das drive-by shooting. Um,
Oh, I was wondering. I thought he was a little confused there. Nice.
and yeah, Omar, who has a woefully undersubscribed channel called Knowledgeable Reaction, has a pretty good
Ooh.
video about it. I can't remember if it's on Knowledgeable Reaction or his. He has another channel too. Omar, if you're in the chat, you should say the name of your kind of not vloggy channel that goes along with Knowledgeable Reaction. But yeah, he does some pretty good stuff on. He did a really good video on this kind of topic about Spanish, the Spanish language in particular in America, and how not learning it is like kind of part of like being like it's very political. And as somebody who is from a country where we also have a very intense our country has literally almost had a secession crisis over language politics, and so it's a big thing.
Yeah, it's so much about identity, you know. I think that another interesting related thing is how many languages are going to die over the next 100 years. You know, a lot of languages are going to die. Like they say, let's see if I can find the article. I'll post it for everybody. But there's some theorize that within a few hundred years, because just practicality reasons, and back to globalization, what I was saying earlier, and how people are upset about that. And I'm one of those guys where, like, sure, I like nostalgia and all that. I like, obviously, I love the past because I teach about the past. But I'm also one of those guys that's like, if it's not practical, why do we still have it around? Like, if it's making lives more difficult, then why are we holding on to something that basically this baggage from the past? Language sometimes, like, I think, and I'll probably get criticized for this, but I mean, it's part of culture that, you know, if it's not useful, it's hard to convince me why we should keep it around or try so hard to keep it around. I can understand people have personal ties to their culture and their identity that they want to have in their own. I'm not saying that we should take it away from them. I'm just saying, like, to try to keep. I mean, you can't. Let's see if I can find that article. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is the reason why, like, there is like kind of a having your cake and eating it too, and this is I had the kind of dream behind what Esperanto was supposed to be, but what English is more turning into, and that is like maybe we should kind of talk about having a universal second language, so that there's a language that we're all that everyone knows that communication's still possible, but also you can open up for a lot of these, like, you know, languages for exploration of communication paradigms and such. And I mean, yeah, the languages are, there is like a decline in the sheer number of languages. There's actually a really cool archive. Here, I'll copy that into the chat for everyone. So there is a archive project to archive these languages as they die out.
Oh, thanks.
And I think now, like, a majority of the world speaks about, I think there's about 7 languages now that most of the world is speaking. And I don't know, one sounds like a very long way off in so many ways. I kind of got a little lost there. Sorry.
Yeah, so, that's not the article I originally read. It's just, but it basically says the same thing, how quickly languages are dying. So thanks for sharing that.
No worries. All right, so let's dig through. I also have a comment from Will saying that he very much, all right, the quote says, just skipped ahead to the live stuff, but not before I heard your disgusting attack on Franklin Pierce. Shame on you both. You'll drive a man to drink. Fake news. He should have added sad.
Hey, Franklin Pierce isn't that bad. I you know, he was an easy target.
Oh,
In the comments, I made a video about him.
Yeah, that does remind me. That would be that's another cool thing that is history adjacent that I think that we should speak about because it's happened fairly recently. Is the Covfefe Act? Have you heard about this? So
I thought it was Kofif, right?
Kofif. I mean, it hasn't had an official. Webster's hasn't added it yet, but maybe it'll end up being the word of the year or something in a near bit. But the Kofif Act or the Covfefe Act or
I have heard of this. Yes, I've heard of this.
All right, so I'll tell the audience what this is, and so the Covfefe Act, if you guys don't remember, that was a really goofy Trump typo that he made on Twitter, and what they decided is that presidential tweets are of historical significance. I wonder why we're talking about that now, but that Trump tweets are of enough historical significance that they should be added into the presidential archive and that they should do it retroactively. So I think that the Library of Congress is now charged to archive all of the Trump tweets and all of Obama's tweets. And I can't remember if there might have been a few months of Bush Jr. tweets, but something makes me think that he's not the Twitter type.
Yeah.
Now I kind of want to know
Twitter
if Junior has a Twitter.
Until 2009, so I don't think it would be leave.
Like if it goes back to like, you know, I would
2006.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that that like, you know, even former presidents would make for good archives, but it doesn't look like Junior even has a Twitter account. So
you think that they'd stop paying attention after they got out of office? But yeah, I guess.
I think that's what him and the Republican Party desperately hopes is that they're.
Yeah, he looks better and better to a lot of people. Bush Jr. does. It's kind of a weird development.
Yeah, who knew that would happen? Okay. Yeah, that was I thought that was just a cool thing because I do think that as a person who is really much into like the history of the internet and such, that that archiving Twitter is a huge deal and I think super important. And I'm really kind of nervous that so much of like public discourse today is tied up in the databanks of a private corporation that could go bankrupt tomorrow and shut down its service and wipe all of its servers and nothing would happen. And there could be a time like 600 years from now where their only knowledge of what Twitter is or what a tweet is just us referring to it contextually. And they'll just say that there was something called Twitter that we had a lot of discussions on, but it's all gone now and we have nothing we can say about it.
Well, first of all, like they have warehouses that were there. Remember, the government has warehouses in Utah. The American government has warehouses in Utah where they are data storing it. But yeah, but second, like that's a great thing to really like. You think about how historians will look at 2017, 2010. I mean, look at all the data that we have. Like you said, corporations they come and go, but a lot of the stuff is archived anyway. Like it's by various third-party sources. So I mean, around. I don't think. And the fact that like, I mean, I don't know when you were born, Tristan, but full of pictures of me when I was a baby. You know, I was 1981, and I mean, growing up, really, you think about it. Or I mean, like my daughters had. I mean, there must have been 1,000 pictures of their birth, each one of them. Like all the data that we have about, like there's doesn't matter how rich or famous you are, there is so much information out there about you, whether you realize it or not. In the future, we're going to sort through all of that to prioritize endeavor. It's just weird to think about, like,
I've
to work with.
Yeah, that's actually kind of part of my research work as well. It's more of the technical stuff, but yeah, how do you sort through databases that are so large that no human being can possibly even get a grasp on what's going on and find information? It's a whole thing. All right, I have a couple questions that someone asked about. All right, I don't even know where I am anymore. Someone asked what my second language was, and that would be. You said in the chat that you speak a little bit of Spanish. I also speak a little bit of Spanish, but probably my strongest second language is French.
Makes sense.
Surprise.
You lived in Quebec, right?
I did. I lived in Quebec for about 3 years.
I've been there. I've been to Quebec.
It's a good place. For anybody at home, Quebec is a province of Canada where 80% of the population speaks French, and French is the official language of the province. It's kind of like Canada's Scotland.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because that was the thing that I said about with secession. We had a secession crisis in 1980 and in the mid-90s over what the rights of French speakers were going to be. All right. Oh yeah, Ome's vlogs.
About Nixon.
Nixon? We got a question about Nixon?
Well, they're talking a lot about Nixon. I'm not sure why. I don't know. I'm not sure what. Oh, they're saying like why some year was the worst.
Nixon is how he's a strange president, and how he was how his. I always had that theory that history was going to be kinder to Nixon than people give him credit for. Like, I feel like once he's out of living memory, like people who remember Watergate firsthand start dying, like that. People will be nicer to him because he's now probably known as like the last moderate Republican president, and like the last like he did a lot of stuff with founding like the Endangered Species Act, the EPA, Water Protection Act, normalized relationships with China, kind of put the Cold War on pause, ended Vietnam, all that kind of stuff.
Vietnam was a big deal. Yeah.
So that's but also everything he does is clouded by the fact that he was paranoid and he was neurotic and he had some serious emotional issues that led him to be always worried about his re-election and whether or not people liked him, and that led him to do some very illegal things.
The fact that he one night he said, "Hey, let's nuke." I think, and they had to like say, "No, dude, There's an cracked article about that. I gotta find that. That out the other day. I had no idea."
The other thing, though, too, is that Nixon is responsible for the war on drugs, and now like comes out that he admitted or that he purposely did the war on drugs in order to suppress black Democrats and like black people in general, because that was what was scaring people at the time.
Oh yeah, the hippies and the blacks. That's why he wanted marijuana illegal. It was a good way to target them and I cover this in my history of marijuana video. How unbelievable to me, like when you realize this deal and how that basically like influenced the rest of the world too, because most of the world in the United States believe. I mean, just straight up racism and straight up the fact that he was just one of those to stop protesting the war and just shut him up and lock him up, and some pretty shady stuff. I mean, but yeah, like when I teach about Nixon, it's always the good and the bad. And I actually do. I tried this activity this past spring, and well, but you know that epic rap battles of history. Epic rap battles of history. Yep. Yeah, the
oh yeah,
an epic rap battle between Bill Clinton and Richard Nixon, because all the scandals associated with Bill Clinton and all the problems with the Nixon administration and the things that they accomplished, brag about what they accomplished, and then talk trash about the other. And it's good. They had fun with it.
Yeah, that would be a good one, especially because those are two presidents whose scandal are going to kind of overshadow what they did. Although I'm trying to think about, like, I mean, very different times being president. Clinton's a hard one to think through, though, for me. I'm drawing a blank for some reason.
Yeah, he had, I mean, a lot of at Clinton, but very little was proven. That was always the issue. That had Travelgate, you had Vince Foster, and then people accusing them of being involved with his death. And
oh yeah, the conspiracy theories are a whole other thing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of blanks.
Well, that depends on what your definition of is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I don't maybe it's because I wasn't as politically aware because I was a young child in the 90s, so I don't really remember a whole lot of what was going on. But I do know that, yeah, there are some people who've really gone down a rabbit hole of Clinton conspiracy theories, and I'm really surprised by it. I don't know why he warrants so many of them. It's really strange to me. I guess because he was also a very secretive person, and
I mean, you can say a lot of the same things about John F. Kennedy that you said about in terms of his with other women.
Yeah. When you cover up your mistakes, people are going to start thinking that you're way more competent. And unfortunately, when you cover up for looking stupid, conspiracy theories will erupt that you're actually a secret evil mastermind. That seems to be that's like the rule of conspiracy theories. If you're to boil it down to one theory.
Yeah, and nobody's a mastermind. Everybody doesn't really know what they're doing, so that's why there's a lot.
Yeah,
it's
like
healthier to me.
Yeah, like the whole concept that like America has some like big evil deep state that like secretly controls everything in a Machiavellian way. If the last like couple years have not taught us that that entire thing is a canard, like it's obvious that there's just a whole everything is just a chaotic, weird system that has a lot of holes and weirdness to it that we don't really know what to do about it.
For freedom is that that we know that we'll stay free because of the incompetence of governments. Like the Constitution protects us. Politicians maybe want to limit some of those protections of freedoms, but ultimately they're going to be limited by their own ability to. That's part of they say the genius of the. That they knew that like they make it difficult for politicians to, which in other countries, I've actually seen comments like, it's so hard to pass legislation, you know, like in the United States, like, because it is easier in other countries to get laws passed and to get, you know, everything, but that's part of how they designed it. They didn't want them to laws.
Yeah, we have that in Canada. Canada is very much like that, and it's good and bad in different ways. Like it allows for us to be able to be bold and forward thinking about things in certain ways. Like we're legalizing marijuana in Canada next year, and we'll be the second country on earth to do so. Which I would think in like a kind of more gridlocky type system would be hard. But it also means that the second we have an election where somebody takes a majority government or like takes government, they basically almost like rewrite the country over again. And so in situations like, say, immigration, our immigration policy changes so fast, government to government, that nobody exactly knows how it works anymore. Nobody can give you a definitive answer.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
So, you know, trade-offs, I guess.
There's one comment on here that I was trying to find. Business companies do something bad. When businesses and companies do something bad, we call them corporations. But when companies and businesses do nothing, then businesses. Not the. I mean, the definition of corporation is. Let me just. It's not the same thing as a company.
Yeah, the
Group of definition.
Yeah, corporations have it. Their
I lost you. You there?
it's a formal definition.
Here. Nope, no, you're not.
While we wait for Matt to come back, I'll tell you guys about what a corporation's supposed to be.
Okay.
So, corporations were a construct of a few. Well, they've shown up a couple times, but the ones that we know of today were basically put together when you had things that the government wanted to get done but didn't want to do it themselves, and also they would be too expensive for one company to do. In the U.S., this specifically was the making of railroads. And so,
Yes.
and so they would put together these corporations in which it would be a company that was made up of a bunch of people instead of just one person. And then they could make a deal with the government to get a whole bunch of money to, you know, put down the railroad. And then they would, you know, that would be like, it's like we're making a company to fill out one specific purpose, and then it does it. Unfortunately, and one of the ways that can make that work well is that you can dissolve responsibility. And so you pretend that a corporation is kind of like on paper a person, so that if, say, somebody sues the railroad for like $1 bajillion, you don't have just one person representing the entire thing, because some people came together to make it work. And so that was the like intent behind it. But then someone thought, hey, well, why don't we just make a corporation where the purpose behind it is to make money? And then you have what you have now.
Right. Yeah. Like it was meant as something just to. But I'm glad you brought up the railroads, though. That a big reason why the railroad was able to take off because of government subsidizing these companies and them all working together. I mean, it was a partnership between. I'm the two. A lot of these companies were about to go bankrupt until the government bailed them out and said, "Hey, we'll keep you'll be on the payroll of the government here, so you guys can keep going."
Yep,
that's a big component.
Yeah, that was a time. That was a time and a half, because it was weird. That was a weird time in America where it was super productive, but also super, super duper corrupt. And so you ended up having things like, like America built a crap ton of railroads in a really short amount of time, really built up its infrastructure to the point where there was actually there was so much like what's it called, grease, palms being greased, and this is becoming so lucrative that people were losing, or people they built more railroads than they actually needed. Some people might argue,
right,
because this was such a lucrative thing. And that was a it's funny because that was such a productive time in history. But
well, you could say the same thing about. I mean, there's other. I mean, look at Soviet Russia and look at. I mean, a lot of like people say that socialism is something that actually hinders economies, but I mean, a lot of times if that helps too, but like if it's the process is more streamlined, then you can actually be extremely productive. Your economy can do well when there's lots of government involvement. And I say that as someone who is generally a pro free market guy. Like government should stay out of the way and let businesses do their own. But yeah, that's your specialty, though, I know. So I don't want to. I mean, you know more about the Gilded Age probably than I do, right?
A little bit. The only thing is that my supervisor is a Gilded Age expert, and so I learn a lot from him. And he taught the U.S. history course that I TA'd for a few years, and so a lot of it's rubbed off on me. But like, I seriously am a 21st century historian. It's so, but I think it's a really cool period in American history. Have you done a video on treating yet? That sounds like a fun U.S. political history video to do.
On treaties?
Treating.
Treating?
Yeah, like the reason why Edgar Allan Poe died.
No.
All
That's
right.
random.
All right. So this is another one of my favorite. This is why the Gilded Age is such a fun period to study. So if anyone knows the story about how Edgar Allan Poe died, like a lot of people probably imagine that he like jumped off the top of a lighthouse with like a single rose being left over or something poetic. But no, he was found in someone else's clothes in a ditch with the crap beaten out of him. And the reason is because there was in like late 19th century, there was a really strange political atmosphere about how elections worked. They worked so differently from today because there were a lot of rules that weren't taken as seriously. And so what would happen was things like verification, identification for voters, and rules like you can't bribe voters were really open.
Oh, yeah.
Really open. And so what they did to Edgar Allan Poe was that he was an alcoholic. He had a drinking problem. And I think it was the Republican Party of Massachusetts or New York or wherever he was at the time, basically said they offered him free booze, and he got super drunk, and then they took him to like 5 or 6 different voting places, and he voted Republican in all those places. Then they'd get him to change his clothes, and he'd go back to those voting places and go and vote again.
Whoa.
All the while, like getting like super, super, super wasted. And then when they were done with him, they basically just beat him up and threw him in a ditch. They didn't know that he was like so drunk, and they beat him up so bad that he died. And but like this happened a lot, where like there was a law where you couldn't give anybody a bribe or a gift in order to vote, but you could give them a gift for voting. And so like for a lot of times in this period, there'd be like elections where the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, whoever was set up by a voting booth, you just happen to know that the Democrats were waiting outside offering free booze to people who voted, and that would, kind of sway the way you voted. And that was also the period where, like, the parties would just be like, they just give somebody like, here's $2, which is like, $1,000 by today's standards or something. Go and get me like 10,000 Polish voters. And these people would just go out and they would go and get Polish people to vote for vote Republican. And they would do it by by like, bribing people, or by giving them free booze, or by like trying to like get, sometimes like by coercion. And this was like how elections were just done for a long time in America. And I thought that it was a really funny period of U.S. history.
Yeah, because how a lot of state laws, local laws, explicitly put an end to that. Like, and my students were always like, "What? Like, this was legal? This used to be legal? It's crazy." Yep. I never knew the details about Edgar Allan Poe. Like, all I knew is that he just got drunk and got.
I will say it's not been confirmed. Nobody went down for it, but this is what historians suspect killed Edgar Allan Poe. Wow. Was that it was the Republican machine of that period that got him out and did that.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah, it's such a weird situation for him. I really need to do some more Gilded Age stuff. That was a weird time in American history.
And you brought up earlier the comparisons to today. I mean, I bring up in my economics class is that this is something that is not sustainable for societies. I mean, it's not like that everywhere, but wealth disparity, I believe, is more prominent now in the United States than it has been since the 1920s. And I believe wealth disparity was probably the worst during the Gilded Age, but yeah, like that trend is the same. There's also the trend of the fact that a lot of people are going to be losing their jobs because they're being replaced by machines. And that I think that first trend during the second industrial revolution, well, any industrial revolution you see this, but where so many people at one time are just like, their skills are no longer needed. It's cheaper to have a machine do it. I think that's going to be something we're all going to have to be worrying about here pretty soon. When I tell people that I think a self-driving car is going to be more, within 10 to 12 years, self-driving cars will outnumber traditional cars on our roads. People look at me like I'm crazy, but I think that's a strong possibility. I think that when you're saving lives, that more people die of car accidents than any other thing other than cancer and heart disease. Like, this is going to be almost like a no-brainer to have a push. And I think that there will be laws passed that says that you have to have self-driving cars, that there's a certain point where that's going to happen. Do you think do you think I'm crazy?
I actually did a whole talk for a it was like a thing where people did science talks in a pub, and I did a whole talk about automation and how these are like the major threats. This is like the major threat of like the next upcoming like few decades that nobody's talking about in a serious way. And the self-driving car thing, I think the big thing that a lot of people don't realize is and this is why, like, I think that you're actually being a little conservative. I think that 2 decades from now, 1 or 2 decades from now, there won't be human. It might be either illegal or too expensive, because once those things start hitting the road and are reliable enough that they're safer than a human driver, all-consuming power of actuarial mathematics starts to show up. And I do think that the second that those cars become available in a meaningful way, find out that car insurance is basically impossible to buy anymore if you insist on driving your own car. That in a very, very fast period of time, there will be virtually no human drivers, because it'll become generally well known that it's you creating more danger for yourself and others because you insist on driving your car, and that the road will function much better with just machines because they can all coordinate with each other. And so like no one's going to let you do it, or either there's going to be some stiff financial penalties, i.e. paying a crap ton for car insurance, or in a very short amount of time, you might just not be allowed to. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, things, I think, beginning of this really big transition period, I think, in history, where I think about my daughters, I keep bringing them up, but I think about when they are my age, or even when they're 18, you know, because learn how to drive a car. Like, how practical will that be? And like, I would have liked for them to learn a second language, like you referred to, like it's a good thing, but on a practical level, English is the language that it's going to be around, and it's going to keep spreading, and it's going to, we have apps, we have already to translate things in real time. So what is the point when you can literally, and it translates for you just like that? I mean, the practicality of learning a second or third language diminishes, and so yeah, I mean, technology, automation, like you said, I mean, we are living in a time that's going to just upend society, and people, especially older people, they just, like, I talked to my dad about this, and he's one of the ones who thinks I'm crazy. Like, yeah, he just does not see that, because he just doesn't see people giving up their cars that easily without a fight. And sure, there will be pushback, but more rapidly than we realize.
I think there probably will be pushback for a little. Like, there will be like one wave of conservative pushback, which will just be people who are afraid of the new things, like the people who are afraid of the motor wagon back in the day. But I think that the next level is that there might be like a small contingency, because like every time I think about like how I had this thing I said, I had a fight on Facebook with an old friend of mine because he made some post whining about people driving auto cars, not like automatic driving cars, but like cars that don't have like a clutch and multiple gears that you have to do yourself. And he thinks that people are like dumb for driving cars that switch gears on their own. And I'm just like, and I just commented being like, dude, we're like not that far away from cars that can drive without people. Are you really like is this whole like, you know, having a clutch and stuff really super important anymore? Like, is this really relevant? There's gonna be some people like that, I guess. I don't know, but like it'll be like the people who always insist on manual cars. I'm not sure how many of those will be.
Yeah, but there'll be racetracks for them. There's still going to be places where they can do it. I'm just saying, like on roads, then
yeah,
not going to be an option.
All of a sudden, NASCAR is going to be like, you know, given the same like type of thing that like horse racing has, you know, like it'll just be like this like gentlemanly like, oh, I'm going to go down to the NASCAR races. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I know you're kind of like in the Midwest, bordering on the South, so NASCAR is a big deal there. But
yeah, like my 10 miles of the Kansas Speedway. So I'm not into it, but yeah, there's a lot of people around here that are.
I'm just imagining like because remember how like when we got rid of horses, all of a sudden horses became like this like aristocratic, gentlemanly activity. And I'm just imagining things like Demolition Derby and NASCAR becoming like these, you know, aristocratic type of events.
That was a weird to think about, like how certain sports are more aristocratic, like golf or tennis. And I always say the culture, the country club culture that but golf, saying golf, that sport is it's expensive. So I mean, yeah, it's expensive these days to buy a horse. I mean, it's to whereas I mean, you think about the fact that they were everywhere in the late 1800s, before cars were on the scene, and yeah, I mean, that's why there's that social status that's tied to it.
And you could imagine though, like already, I bet a NASCAR car is pretty damn expensive. But like, if you got to the point where not everybody owned cars, and or at least cars you drove yourself, and then you had a sport out of racing them, where like it took a kind of like a lot of time mastering a skill that nobody does anymore, then I could easily see something like NASCAR becoming this like country club type sport, and I find that an absolutely hilarious proposition. 'Cause it's like,
Yeah.
like maybe like that's what the Kentucky Derby will be next.
That's a very interesting. I think that's a possibility. Yeah, I think you're onto something.
Now, the driving sports that are of the demolition derby or monster variety, I'm not sure. I'm not impressed.
Dang it!
And like demolition derbies and oh,
You went okay. You're back. You went out for a little bit there. Okay.
oh no. So I was wondering if I was just like wondering out loud if like demolition derby, monster trucks, and like Truckosaurus are still, or that's like a. I don't know.
If that's a what?
Like monster trucks.
What about monster trucks though?
Is it still a thing? Like I haven't heard about it in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, at least in my neck of the woods, it is. I mean, and it's a typically more blue collar thing. It's I have not attended any, but I have been to a what do they call it? Derby something, where they basically destroyed old vehicles.
Nice, I guess.
Gosh, I should know this.
Yeah, maybe like yeah. Who knows what like the motor sports of the future will be like then? Like what will fill NASCAR's a NASCAR sized hole in the world when when the culture changes around that. So I think I got a cool question about something that had to do with this. Oh no, I had a question about the flavors of anarchism, which is a perfect segue from monster trucks.
Logically, yes.
And just the question about why anarcho-capitalism is more popular in America than anarcho-communism, and it's like,
well, that should be easy.
Yeah.
Think about we were built on capitalism. I mean, that's not something that it's so ingrained in culture, just like Puritanism. I mean, it's always been there. Like, and it started with the colonies. I mean, the fact that there was so much the British could not control that was going on, so many black markets, so many own businesses. I mean, that's I mean, I would argue that Adam Smith had more influence in the United States more than any other place of the world, really. I mean, because you think about within the United Kingdom, they still had their own regulations and controls. I mean, we were set free. You really do. The closest we've ever gotten to pure capitalism has been in the United. We've never gotten to pure capitalism. It's silly to think that is even something that could realistically happen in the near future. I mean, but yeah, like communism has been such a pejorative ever since really the first Red Scare. I mean, you think about the fact that so many people just lashed out against it right after World War One, and that just carried over. And the second Red Scare was even worse. I mean, I'm surprised to see when I go on Reddit and I see how many self-proclaimed communists are on there, I'm amazed, because it's just not a large part of our culture. It still kind of has that negative connotation, even though I joke around, like with my students, say, hey, if I think they did something that I don't like I say, oh, you're one of those communists, aren't you? Like, just joking around. But that could really, you think about the early 1950s. I mean, that really was a witch hunt. I mean, I don't know if that was so much the case in Canada as it was down here, but it was.
We had, I'm pretty sure that we had a bit of a Red Scare, not nearly as big a deal though. But also, we were a country that managed to eke some advantage by kind of being friends with people who had trouble, like kind of playing the Cold War game a little bit. Like we made a lot of hay out of being like the country that stayed friends with Cuba. Like one of the things that I think that the United States press didn't take too well. I'm not sure if it was a big deal in the U.S., but when Fidel Castro died, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, went to his funeral and did like a big speech about how close they were and how he really respected him and stuff. And the thing is that it's because Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, who was our prime minister in like the 1970s, was actually really close friends with Fidel Castro, and Justin Trudeau was just a child back then. And Canada and Cuba have had really good relationship ever since, or had really good relationship for quite a while. And there's like a few little things like that. And we also do have a little bit of, like, we had some very socialist kind of grassroots movements, almost like the Tea Party movement, but for socialists out in like our really rural boony regions. I think that America had a little bit of that too, because like when I think about like anarchism in America, I think of like the Wobblies and like, there was a prominent socialist and anarchist and communist movement in the United States for quite a while. But I think that that Red Scare of 1919 that you spoke of, that's the one that like really stabbed a lot of those movements and kind of put them down really hard. And any that were still around, you also mentioned like the kind of 1950s second Red Scare, the McCarthy type period. There was also a wave of overt political repression of kind of socialist thought in America in that period. And so it's not just that like there is a capitalist bent that kind of is baked into the American culture, but also there has been a few very concerted efforts in U.S. history to put down social or any sort of Marxist-leaning thought, and so that's why it's still very marginalized today. And anarcho-capitalism has also been triumphed to the point where there have been American politicians who semi-identified as anarcho-communists. The example that comes to mind is, I think it's Alan Greenspan, who partially identified as an anarcho-capitalist.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
And the kind of veneration of people like Ayn Rand, who, while she would probably not consider herself in the anarchist realm, is still like a hyper-libertarian, and that's still a pretty powerful political movement in America. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. I mean, I think of your fellow Canadian Stéphane Molyneux, who identifies as an anarcho-capitalist, and that's kind of, I never even really heard the term. I think until I found him a few years ago. Honestly, like it's really grown a lot, and
but yeah, I mean, you know, not that far removed from the Cold War, so it's understandable that even today, communism is a pretty dirty word in the United States. And
yeah, I mean, the Cold War ended still in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And
some people say that we still live in the Cold War, which I guess if you want to take it to another level of definition.
You can I can argue that if you abstract abstract the Cold War out, like, there's a lot of people out there who would say that the Cold War wasn't so much of the war of ideologies as it was like a sort of power projection game between the two powers that survived World War II, and that the ideology behind why they did what they did was kind of, you know, not as important as people make it out to be, which would understand why, like, the Soviets would back some less than communist type people, and the Americans would back some sometimes communist, but very many some less than democratic people.
Exactly.
And
that's my definition of the Cold War. Yeah, it's all about the power struggle, geopolitical. Yeah. Ideology. No, that was just something to PR campaign.
And then, and if Russia is trying to play that game again, I think that because of the legacy of the Cold War, the U.S. media plays up how much of a hand Russia has. But you could probably argue that there's something like that going on. I think that it's a bit too simple, and that I think that it really overestimates the position that Russia's in right now.
I agree. Like, when I have people ask me, like, what do you think about the threat of Russia? I mean, the only thing that I think that should be alarming is the arsenal of nukes that, we people forget how many countries have nukes, and how actually there might be nukes out there that are not in the right hands that we would. There are nukes that maybe aren't accounted for, is basically what I'm saying here.
Mm-hmm.
So those of you watching, it's okay. You can freak out. We're all going to die. But no, the of Russia is not that impressive to me. And sure, it's grown, and since Putin took over, in years it's grown, but their population is shrinking. They're going to be losing people, just like much of Eastern Europe. It's just not as impressive of a country to me as in terms of, like, we're still in a Cold War when they're not a superpower as the other superpower. As long as our relationship with China is enough where we're not threatening each other like North Korea threatens the United States, then I think it's going to be war. Find it. You again. Hello? But so I'll just talk. Okay. Yeah. So here, Tristan, and you can check out my channel at Mr. Beat. I hear something. Okay, Eric, and the hostage, the American hostage who returned home. Yeah, he's still in a coma, but completely unresponsive. I'm finding that pretty. The fact that this, in years past, you'd have something like this happen, and more of an uproar about it. That more and more people are getting with North Korea. Oh, okay. Waiting for Tristan to come back. Looks like he's completely off. Send a message here on Twitter. Got caught up in the tornado. There was a tornado warning for his area, so coming back. How would and when the USA fall? The US will fall if falls. I mean, if its currency falls. It has the world's reserve currency. As the world's reserve currency, I mean, China relies on the United States just as much as we rely on them. We rely on China for the cheap goods that they provide. Those goods. I mean, it's It's been gone for, I don't know. I'm still waiting to, I sent him a message. Maybe he started a new one. I don't know. Okay, thanks, Kelly. But yeah, as far as the United States falling, I think, yeah, Tristan got kicked off. States, I think, the interest rates just went up. I don't know if you guys heard, the Federal Reserve is raising the interest rates again. The economy, sure, it's not ideal. It'd be better if people were paid more, but as far as productivity, it continues to go up. The GDP is still creeping up. So I think in the foreseeable future, it's still going to be a leading, to assume that the United States is always going to be the leading power in the world, is considering all superpowers eventually. And not that I want that to happen, but it's kind of nice living in the United States when you're the top dog. Any other questions while we're waiting on Tristan to come back? Scrolling back up here to see if I missed anything. Only bro 555. You said, well, we have pure capitalism. Agree with you on that. I think that we've always had regulations in place, that we've always had requirements by government intrusion to have. I mean, capitalism is always going to be limited. Free markets are going to be occurring, and even with when it goes underground, they react based on
alrighty
markets. Hey, he's back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can't see you yet, though.
Hello?
Nope.
I like your picture. That's great.
Oh no.
Oh, there you are. I heard you.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, you're super lagged.
Hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, thoughts on
Hello?
Nazbols?
Nope.
No.
Bolshevism?
No.
National Bolshevik Party. Oh. Yeah, I don't know much about the National Bolshevik Party, but I think that one thing about Russia is the younger people there are they're not fallen for government propaganda at all, like more individualistic than previous generations. Puerto Rico will gain independence or become a state in the near future. Well, they voted a couple years ago.
Already. Hello.
United States. Yes, there you are. Can't see you, but
All right, I can see Mr. Beats. I can't I can't hear him. Oh no.
Well, they can hear you.
Okay. All right. I think I got it. Can you hear me? All right. I've been told I'm obnoxiously loud.
Yeah, it's like you have a different microphone.
Yeah, I ran upstairs quickly to my desktop, but it doesn't have a webcam, so I will unfortunately be faceless for the rest of the broadcast.
And to what's that machine called on 2001: A Space Odyssey?
2001.
So the movie where they're talking to the machine, and that's what it looks like when every time you talk, like you're. So.
I'm sorry, Matt. I can't let you do that.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, because I really got to go to the bathroom, and I was answering while you were gone, and as bowls I knew nothing about, so I kind of just brought up Puerto Rico.
What do you think? State, no state?
I do think in the near future, but I think eventually Puerto Rico will be a state. I think. I mean, there's enough people there that want us to join. It's the people. It's really Republicans in Congress that don't want them to join, and it's understandable because it's another Democratic state. They would basically vote Democratic, and that would. So there's going to have to be a shakeup in terms of the Democratic Party is going to have to gain more control of both houses of Congress. I think first.
Yeah.
Block. Yeah.
Something deep inside makes me think that might be a potential in the near future. Who knows?
We did have a Democrat lose to a Republican in Montana. The night before, he basically threw down a reporter, like assaulted a reporter. Next day, he gets elected. It's only in Montana, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
Montana.
Oh man. Well, Montana's a special state. It's its own thing. It lives in its own world.
I am from Kansas, so it's quite its own world too.
Well, if you gotta go, I mean, I have a dinner date that I have to get ready to move towards as well. So I want to just finish off by thank you so much, Matt, for coming and speaking to us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Tristan, and looking forward to meeting you next week at VidCon.
Likewise, and everybody else, of course, if you want to check out his channel, Mr. Beat, his YouTube channel, I'm sure you can find it by searching Mr. Beats up on YouTube, and he has a lot of original music, and it's really fun. I recommend you check it out. And of course, because this is Subscriber Appreciation Day, I really appreciate everybody for being here and supporting Step Back, for all the great stuff you guys have done and coming out to these hangouts and watching the videos and showing them to your friends. We just passed 20,000 subscribers this month, which is a huge deal. And this group is moving more and more and more. I'm really excited, and I think that there's a lot of really great stuff coming up in the next little while. Now, I should give it a little bit of housekeeping for you guys who've listened this far out, and that is I'm moving after VidCon, right after I get back from VidCon, I have to move. And so the next video might be a bit. I'm going to try to do as much as I can, but after I move, I'm going to be living about half an hour's walk from the YouTube space and in a much better situation to make more Step Back stuff and better Step Back stuff. So it's an exciting move. It's going to be a disruption for a few weeks.
In Toronto?
Yep, moving to Big
Nice.
TO. Alrighty, well, thank you very much, and we will. I'm going to push the red button now. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.